Detective Harris called me into his office on a Tuesday morning, the kind that smelled like stale coffee and broken promises. I'd been at my desk filling out paperwork for a domestic assault case when his assistant gestured toward the closed door with a look that said, "This wasn't routine. Reed, sit down." Harris was 53, gray at the temples, and had the kind of tired eyes that came from 25 years watching the worst of humanity. He slid a folder across his desk. "We need someone for a long-term undercover operation. High risk, high reward. I'm recommending you." I opened the folder. The first photo showed a man in an expensive suit leaving what looked like an upscale restaurant. Dark hair, strong features, the kind of face you'd remember. Julian Santoro, 36 years old, suspected head of the Santoro crime family operating along the East Coast. "We've been trying to nail this guy for 3 years," Harris continued. "Money laundering, weapons trafficking, ties to cartels. But he's smart, keeps his hands clean. We need someone on the inside, someone who can get close." "How close?" I asked. "His household staff. We have an opening for a housekeeper through an agency he uses. You'd be there daily. Access to his home, his office, his private life. Plant surveillance equipment, copy files, gather evidence we can actually use in court." I studied the photo again. Julian Santoro didn't look like the monsters I'd put away before. He looked like someone you'd see at a charity gala or a museum opening. That was probably the point. "Why me?" The question came out sharper than intended. Harris leaned back in his chair. "Because you're smart, you're thorough, and you have something to prove." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "Ryan's death wasn't your fault, Olivia. But I know you blame yourself. This is your chance to make a real difference. Take down someone who actually deserves it. Ryan. My partner for 3 years. Dead because we trusted the wrong informant in a drug bust that went sideways. I'd replayed that night 1,000 times, wondering what I could have done differently. The guilt sat in my chest like a stone. "I'm in," I said. 2 weeks of intensive training followed. I learned how to clean like a professional, how to move through a house efficiently without drawing attention, how to plant listening devices smaller than a dime in places nobody would think to check. They gave me a crash course in Portuguese since my cover would be Brazilian. I practiced my accent until it sounded natural, learned to stumble over English words convincingly. My new identity came in a manila envelope. Maria Santos, 28 years old, born in São Paulo, moved to the States 5 years ago. Limited English. Background check showed employment at various cleaning services. Nothing remarkable. No criminal record. No red flags. "Remember," the training officer said on my last day, "you're not Detective Olivia Reed in there. You're Maria. You're invisible. You're just someone who cleans toilets and doesn't ask questions. The moment you forget that, you're compromised." I reported to the agency on a Monday morning. The manager barely looked at me before assigning me to the Santoro residence. Apparently, Julian preferred consistent staff, paid well, and didn't tolerate mistakes. She made me sign a stack of non-disclosure agreements about client privacy. The mansion sat in an affluent neighborhood behind iron gates and manicured hedges. I'd driven past places like this my whole life, never imagining I'd actually enter one. The security guard at the gate checked my credentials, made me wait while he confirmed my appointment, then waved me through. A woman in her 50s answered the door. Anna, according to my briefing. Italian accent, kind eyes, probably been with the family for years. Ana me pagou as horas extras em dinheiro. O contrato com a agência era quinzenal, mas as gorjetas e pequenos ajustes do dia ficavam em espécie. "You are the new housekeeper, Maria." She looked me over critically. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, making sure my Portuguese accent colored the words. "I am here to clean. Come. I show you where things are." She led me through a marble foyer into a kitchen that belonged in a magazine. "Mr. Santoro, he likes things very clean. Very organized. You understand?" "I understand." A man appeared in the doorway. Older, military posture, eyes that saw everything. Vincent, the head of security. He studied me with the kind of attention that made my skin crawl. I kept my expression neutral, deferential, exactly what a nervous cleaning woman would do when faced with someone intimidating. "New hire?" His voice was gravel. "Yes, sir," Anna answered for me. Maria. She comes very recommended. Vincent nodded slowly, still watching me. For one terrible second, I wondered if he recognized me from somewhere, if this entire operation was already blown. But he just turned and walked away without another word. Anna showed me where the cleaning supplies were kept, explained the schedule. Mondays and Thursdays were my days. 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Stay out of Mr. Santoro's way. Don't touch anything in his office unless explicitly told to clean it. Respect his privacy. I spent the first 4 hours methodically working through the downstairs rooms. Living room, dining room, kitchen, guest bathroom. Everything was already immaculate. I was cleaning what didn't need to be cleaned, maintaining an illusion of perfection. The whole time my mind cataloged details. Security cameras in every corner. Reinforced doors. Windows with sensors. Around 10, I heard footsteps upstairs. Male voices speaking Italian too quickly for me to catch more than fragments. Then silence. A door closing. Mr. Santoro has meetings, Anna explained when she brought me water. Very important business. You just keep working. At noon, I finally caught a glimpse of him. Julian Santoro descending the staircase with 2 other men in suits. He was taller than his photos suggested, moved with the kind of confidence that didn't need to prove anything. His eyes swept the room and landed on me for exactly half a second before moving on. I didn't exist to him. I was furniture. Exactly what I needed to be. The men left through the front door. Anna told me I could take lunch in the staff room, a small area off the kitchen where Paolo the driver was reading a newspaper. We nodded at each other. I ate the sandwich I'd brought in silence. By 1:30, the house was empty, except for Anna in the kitchen and Vincent somewhere monitoring security feeds. This was my window. I'd trained for this moment, knew exactly where to go, what to look for. Julian's office was on the 2nd floor, door unlocked. Inside, it looked like any wealthy businessman's workspace. Mahogany desk, leather chair, bookshelves lined with volumes that probably cost more than my car. I moved quickly, pulled out the device from the hidden pocket in my cargo pants. It looked like a small black button, adhesive backing. I placed it under the lip of his desk where fingers would never brush, where eyes would never think to look. 10 seconds. In and out. Back downstairs, I finished the bathrooms and left at exactly 2 o'clock like I was supposed to. Anna paid me in cash, told me she'd see me Thursday. I drove 3 blocks before pulling over and letting my hands shake. First day done. Device planted. Cover intact. I was officially inside Julian Santoro's world. That night in my apartment, I thought about Ryan. About how he'd always said the key to undercover work was committing to the role completely. Becoming someone else so thoroughly that you forgot yourself. I wondered if that's what had gotten him killed in the end. That commitment. That belief that he could control the situation. I pulled out his photo from my wallet. 3 years we'd worked together. 3 years of trust and partnership. Gone in 30 seconds of gunfire because we'd believed a lie. This one's for you, I whispered to the image. Thursday I'd go back. Plant more devices. Gather more intelligence. Get closer to a man who probably destroyed lives before breakfast. And somewhere in this process, I'd prove that Ryan's death meant something. That I could finish what we'd started. The mission was simple on paper. 30 days to gather evidence, build a case, bring down a criminal organization. Simple didn't mean easy, and it definitely didn't mean safe. Thursday came too quickly. I arrived at the mansion at 6 in the morning like I was supposed to. The sky still dark and heavy with clouds. The guard at the gate recognized me this time, barely glanced at my ID before waving me through. Anna was already in the kitchen when I let myself in through the back entrance. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, mixing with something sweeter. Pastries, maybe. She nodded at me without interrupting whatever she was doing at the stove. I started in the living room like always. Vacuuming. Dusting surfaces that didn't have dust. Straightening pillows that were already straight. The listening device I'd planted in the office was transmitting to a receiver hidden in my car. Later tonight, I'd download the recordings and send them to Harris. For now, I just needed to maintain the routine. Julian came downstairs at 7:30. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Deliberately made myself busy with the bookshelf in the corner. He walked past without acknowledging me. Went straight to the kitchen where Anna had breakfast waiting. Through the doorway I could see him sitting at the table, reading something on his phone. Just a man having coffee. Nothing sinister about it, except I knew what he was. Had read the files. Knew about the suspected weapons deals. The money that moved through shell corporations. The connections to cartels and syndicates. Looking at him now, you'd never guess. That was probably the point. "Maria, you want coffee?" Anna called from the kitchen. "No, thank you," I replied, keeping my accent thick. "I have work to do." The next few days fell into a pattern. Arrive at 6, clean the main floor before Julian woke up. At 8 o'clock, I'd move to his office while he had breakfast or took calls in other parts of the house. I'd planted 3 more devices by the end of the first week, one behind a bookshelf, another under the windowsill, a third inside a decorative vase that nobody would move. The conversations I captured were frustratingly mundane. Business discussions about restaurant profit margins, calls with lawyers about property acquisitions, a lengthy argument with someone about the quality of wine being imported. Nothing illegal. Nothing I could use. There were hints, though. Vague references to shipments and schedules. Mentions of payments that sounded too large for legitimate transactions. But nothing concrete. Nothing that would hold up in court. On my 3rd Tuesday, I noticed something different. A man in priestly robes arrived around 9 in the morning. Anna greeted him warmly, led him to the terrace where Julian was waiting. They sat together for over an hour, talking in Italian that I couldn't quite catch from where I was cleaning nearby windows. "That is Padre Miguel," Anna told me later when I asked. "He comes every Tuesday and Thursday. He has known Mr. Santoro since he was a boy. They are close? Very close. The Padre, he is like family." I filed that away. Crime bosses who met regularly with priests, that was new. Maybe it was for show, maintaining an image, or maybe it meant something else. I wasn't sure yet. Wednesday morning brought another pattern. Julian left the house at exactly 7 o'clock. Vincent drove him in the black SUV, just the two of them. They returned at 9:15. I'd tracked this through security logs I'd managed to glimpse on Vincent's computer. Same thing every single Wednesday, like clockwork. I reported it to Harris during our weekly check-in, a brief phone call from a burner I kept hidden in my apartment. "Could be collecting payments," he said. "Or meeting with distributors. Keep watching. See if you can find out where he goes." But I couldn't follow him. That would blow my cover immediately. All I could do was observe and document. Wait for him to make a mistake. Sunday was the strangest day. I wasn't scheduled to work, but I drove past the mansion anyway just to see. The gates were closed. No cars coming or going. When I checked the audio feeds later, they showed nothing. Hours of silence. Julian didn't conduct business on Sundays. Didn't take calls. Didn't meet with anyone. I thought about Ryan on Sunday evenings. We used to grab drinks at this dive bar near the precinct, decompress from the week. He'd been good at reading people. Better than me. Could spot a liar from across a room. I wondered what he'd make of Julian Santoro. Whether he'd see the same contradictions I was seeing. The expensive vase incident happened on Thursday of my 2nd week. I was cleaning the hallway upstairs, being careful around the antiques that probably cost more than my annual salary. My elbow caught the edge of a porcelain piece on a side table. I watched in horror as it tipped, fell, shattered across the marble floor into a dozen pieces. My heart stopped. In my head, I calculated how quickly I could run, whether Vincent would catch me before I reached the gates, whether this whole operation was about to collapse because of one stupid mistake. Footsteps approached rapidly. Julian appeared from his office, saw the broken vase, saw me standing there with cleaning supplies in hand and panic written all over my face. "I am so sorry," I stammered in Portuguese accented English. "I will pay for it. I will—" "Are you hurt?" The question caught me off guard. "What?" "Your hands. Did you cut yourself?" He was already checking, eyes scanning my arms for injuries. "There's glass everywhere." No, I am okay." "Good. That's what matters." He looked at the broken pieces scattered across the floor. This was my grandmother's, but things break. People don't heal as easily. He said something in Italian that I didn't catch. then switched back to English. Anna will help you clean this up. Don't worry about the cost. These things happen. He walked away before I could respond. Left me standing there trying to reconcile the man who'd just prioritized my safety over a family heirloom with the criminal I was supposed to be investigating. Anna appeared with a broom and dustpan. Mr. Santoro, he is not like you expect, yes? No, I admitted. He is not. That night, I listened to 12 hours of audio recordings. Julian on the phone with someone named Francesco, discussing shipping routes and delivery schedules. Could be legitimate. Could be code for something else. Julian in a meeting with 3 men whose voices I didn't recognize, talking about expansion into new territories, business or criminal enterprise. Impossible to tell from context alone. And then, late at night when the house was supposedly empty, I heard something I wasn't prepared for. Julian's voice, alone in his office, speaking Italian in a tone I hadn't heard before. Soft. Broken. After several minutes, I realized what he was doing. He was talking to someone who wasn't there. To his dead wife, maybe. Telling her about his day. About the vase that broke. About missing her. I sat in my apartment with my laptop open, audio files playing through my headphones, and felt something I absolutely could not afford to feel. Sympathy. Vincent was watching me more carefully by the end of week 2. I'd catch him studying me when he thought I wasn't looking. Once I found him in the hallway outside the office, I'd just finished cleaning, standing perfectly still like he was waiting to see what I'd do. Mr. Vincent, I said, keeping my voice neutral. You need something cleaned? No. He didn't elaborate, just kept looking at me with those calculating eyes. You're different from the others. Others? Previous housekeepers. They were less observant. My pulse spiked, but I kept my expression confused. I do not understand. Don't you? He stepped closer. Be careful, Maria. This house has eyes everywhere. He walked away, leaving me with the distinct impression that he knew something, or suspected something. Either way, I'd just been warned. I should have reported it immediately. Should have told Harris that my cover might be compromised. But I didn't, because I wanted to stay. Wanted to keep watching Julian Santoro and trying to figure out who he really was. The man who attended mass with priests and visited cemeteries alone. The man who cared more about my safety than his grandmother's vase. The man who ran a criminal empire but treated his staff like family. Ryan used to say that everyone was capable of both good and evil, that the job was figuring out which one they chose when it mattered. I'd thought he was being philosophical. Now I wondered if he'd been trying to prepare me for exactly this situation. 2 weeks down. 2 weeks of observing, recording, gathering pieces of a puzzle that refused to make sense. 2 weeks of pretending to be someone I wasn't while trying to remember why I'd agreed to this in the first place. Justice for Ryan. That was why. Justice for all the people Julian Santoro had probably hurt. I just needed to find the proof. Breaking protocol was easier than I expected. On Wednesday morning of my 3rd week, I called in sick to the mansion but showed up anyway. Not as Maria the housekeeper, as myself. Jeans, jacket, baseball cap pulled low. I parked 3 blocks away and waited. Julian's black SUV pulled out of the gates at exactly 7 o'clock. Vincent behind the wheel, Julian in the back seat. I followed at a distance, keeping 2 cars between us the whole time. My hands were steady on the wheel even though my heart hammered against my ribs. This was stupid. Reckless. If Vincent spotted me, the entire operation collapsed. They drove for 20 minutes, heading into an older part of the city where the buildings looked like they remembered better days. The SUV turned into Oak Hill Cemetery, rolling slowly through ornate iron gates that probably dated back a century. I parked outside and waited 5 minutes before following on foot. The cemetery stretched across several acres, headstones arranged in neat rows under ancient oak trees. Morning fog clung to the ground, making everything look ethereal and slightly unreal. I spotted the SUV parked near the eastern section. Vincent leaned against the driver's door, scrolling through his phone. Julian had walked deeper into the grounds, disappearing behind a marble mausoleum. I circled wide, using monuments and trees as cover. Found a spot about 50 yards away where I could see without being seen. Julian stood in front of a simple granite headstone. fresh flowers already placed in the built-in vase. He'd brought roses, white ones. Sophia Santoro. Beloved wife. The dates told me she'd been 31 when she died. 3 years ago last month. Julian just stood there. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the ground like if he looked hard enough he could see through 6 feet of earth and casket wood to the woman he'd lost. I thought about the cemetery where Ryan was buried. How it had taken me 4 months before I could visit without breaking down. How even now, 2 years later, I still sometimes drove there at night, when I couldn't sleep, and sat in my car talking to a piece of marble like it could answer back. After about 20 minutes, Julian knelt. His lips moved. I was too far away to hear words, but the body language was clear. He was talking to her, telling her things he couldn't say to anyone else. When he finally stood again, I saw him wipe his face with the back of his hand. Vincent didn't ask questions when Julian returned to the SUV. They just drove away, leaving me crouched behind a 200-year-old tomb, feeling like I'd witnessed something I had no right to see. I spent the rest of that day digging into Julian's financial records. Not the obvious accounts the department had already examined, the ones buried deeper. Shell corporations, charitable foundations, business holdings that led to other business holdings in a maze designed to confuse. What I found didn't match the profile of a typical crime boss. St. Anthony's Children's Home received $50,000 monthly from a company called Riverside Holdings. Riverside was owned by Santoro Enterprises. I pulled records going back 3 years. The donations had started exactly 1 month after Sophia's death. A free medical clinic in the poorest neighborhood downtown, funded by another Santoro subsidiary. They provided basic health care, vaccinations, prenatal care to anyone who walked through the door. No questions asked. An orphanage run by the Catholic Church. A rehabilitation program for former convicts trying to get their lives together. A scholarship fund for kids from broken homes. All of it traced back to Julian's money, filtered through enough corporate layers that most people would never make the connection. I cross-referenced the amounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. Maybe millions over time. This wasn't money laundering. The money went out, but nothing came back. It was just giving. Harris wouldn't like this. I could already hear his response. Criminals donate to charity all the time. It's PR. Makes them look legitimate. Doesn't change what they are. But I'd seen Julian's face at that cemetery. That wasn't PR. That was grief. Thursday, I was back at the mansion in my Maria costume, cleaning and pretending the previous day hadn't happened. My nerves were shot. Every time Vincent looked at me, I wondered if he'd somehow figured out I'd followed them. If he'd seen my car. If this was the day everything fell apart. Julian's office felt different now. I'd been in there a dozen times, planting devices and searching drawers. But today, I noticed things I'd glossed over before. A photo of him and Sophia on what looked like their wedding day, tucked into the corner of his desk. A rosary hanging from the lamp. Books on the shelf about grief and faith and finding meaning after loss. One drawer was slightly open, not locked like usual. I shouldn't have looked. Should have just closed it and moved on. But I didn't. Inside were more photos. Julian and Sophia traveling. Paris. Rome. Somewhere with a beach and impossibly blue water. They looked happy. Really happy. Not the forced smiles people put on for cameras. The real thing. Underneath the photos was a journal. Leather-bound. Edges worn from handling. Sophia's name embossed on the cover in gold letters. I picked it up with gloved hands even though I knew I shouldn't touch it at all. Opened to a random page. Her handwriting was neat, measured, exactly what you'd expect from someone organized and thoughtful. Julian came home late again. He says he's trying to find a way out, but it's complicated. I told him we could leave. Start over somewhere new. But he says it's not that simple. The family has eyes everywhere. His father's legacy is a chain around his neck. I see how it tears him apart. He wants to be good. To do good. But the world he inherited won't let him. I flipped ahead. Found an entry from a few weeks before her death. He's been meeting with someone from the federal government. Won't tell me details, but I can tell it's serious. Dangerous. He says it's the only way to truly break free, to dismantle everything his father built and walk away clean. I'm terrified, but I'm also proud. My husband is trying to do the right thing, even though it could destroy him. That's who he really is, under all the baggage and the reputation. He's good. The last entry was dated 3 days before the car accident. Julian seems different lately. Lighter somehow. Like he can finally see the end of this nightmare. He promised me that by next year we'd be somewhere else. Living normal lives. Maybe even starting a family. I believe him. For the first time in a long time, I actually believe we have a future. I closed the journal and put it back exactly where I'd found it. My hands were shaking. I left the office, went to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on my face until I could breathe normally again. Anna found me in the hallway 10 minutes later, probably looking pale. "Maria, you are okay?" "Yes, just dizzy for a moment." "You work too hard. Come, have some tea." She led me to the kitchen, sat me down like I was family instead of hired help, and made chamomile tea in a china cup that probably cost more than my weekly salary. She didn't ask questions. Just let me sit there and try to process what I'd just read. Julian had been working with federal authorities. Not now. 3 years ago. Before his wife died. And then she died, and presumably the deal had fallen apart. Because the only evidence the department had against him was old. 3 years old. Right before Sophia's accident. What if he'd been trying to get out? What if he'd been cooperating and then his wife was murdered and the whole thing collapsed? What if I wasn't investigating a criminal at all, but someone who'd been betrayed by the very system I represented? Vincent appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Maria." A word. Anna looked between us, but didn't interfere. I followed Vincent into the hallway, my pulse spiking. This was it. He'd figured me out. I ran through exit strategies in my head. The back door was 30 feet away. My car was 3 blocks. Vincent was armed, but I was fast. "You've been here 3 weeks," he said quietly. "In that time, you've never made a single mistake except that vase. You move through this house like you're looking for something, and you ask a lot of questions for someone who barely speaks English. I do not understand." "Yes, you do." He stepped closer. "I know who you are, Olivia Reed. I've known since your 2nd day here." The world tilted. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. "I'm not telling Mr. Santoro," Vincent continued. "Not yet, but I'm watching you. And I need you to understand something. This man you're investigating, he's trying to fix the mess he inherited. He's trying to be better than the legacy forced on him. If you destroy that because you're too focused on the past to see the present, you'll regret it." He walked away before I could respond, left me standing in the hallway trying to remember how to breathe. I should have called Harris immediately, should have aborted the mission. Vincent knowing my real identity meant operational security was completely compromised. But I didn't call, because Vincent had said he wasn't telling Julian. Which meant he was protecting him, or protecting me, or maybe both. I finished my shift in a daze, went home, sat on my couch staring at the wall until midnight. Ryan's photo was on my bookshelf. I picked it up, studied his face. "What would you do?" I asked the image. "If you found out the person you were investigating wasn't what you thought? If everything was more complicated than the file suggested?" Ryan didn't answer. He never did, but I remembered something he'd said once. The job isn't about punishing people for who they are. It's about stopping them from hurting others. If someone's trying to change, trying to be better, maybe that matters too. I'd thought he was being soft at the time. Now I wondered if he'd been trying to teach me something I was only just starting to understand. Julian Santoro wasn't a monster. He was a man trapped in circumstances he hadn't chosen, trying to find a way out while honoring a dead wife's memory, and doing what good he could with the resources he had. And I was the person who might destroy his last chance at redemption, because I was too afraid to question my orders. The call came at 3 a.m. Not to me, but I heard about it 6 hours later when I arrived at the mansion and found the entire place transformed into something resembling a war zone. Extra security at the gates, men I'd never seen before patrolling the grounds with visible weapons. Vincent barking orders into his phone in rapid Italian. Anna met me at the door, her face pale. There was trouble last night. At the port. Very bad trouble. What kind of trouble? She just shook her head and gestured for me to come inside. The house felt different. Colder somehow, despite the morning sun streaming through the windows. I went through my usual routine, but everything was off. The living room had muddy footprints tracked across the carpet. The kitchen smelled like disinfectant, the kind used to clean up blood. Julian came down the stairs at 8:30, and I barely recognized him. His shirt was wrinkled, partially untucked. His hair wasn't styled, just pushed back carelessly. But it was his face that stopped me. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Dark circles under his eyes. A cut on his cheekbone that had been cleaned but not bandaged. He didn't go to the kitchen. Didn't pour coffee. Just stood in the foyer staring at nothing while Vincent approached with a tablet, showing him something I couldn't see. Julian's jaw clenched. He nodded once, turned, and went back upstairs without a word. "What happened?" I asked Anna when I found her in the pantry. She was quiet for a long moment, arranging canned goods that didn't need arranging. The cartel. They attacked one of Mr. Santoro's operations. Tried to take territory that does not belong to them. Her hands shook slightly. Rico is dead. 3 others hurt. Mr. Santoro, he was there when it happened. Rico. I'd seen him around the house a few times. Young guy, maybe 24, always smiling. He'd helped me carry cleaning supplies up the stairs once, insisted even though it wasn't his job. How is Mr. Santoro handling it? Anna looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. How do you think? That boy's mother, she lost her husband 2 years ago. Rico was all she had. And now Mr. Santoro must go tell her that her son died working for him. The funeral was 3 days later. I wasn't supposed to attend, but I did anyway, standing at the back of the church in street clothes. Just another mourner. The place was packed. Rico's mother sat in the front pew, supported by 2 other women. She looked broken in a way that felt too familiar. Julian sat 3 rows back, not at the front where you'd expect someone of his position. He stayed through the entire service, through every prayer and hymn, through the mother's wailing grief when they closed the casket. When it was over, he approached her. I watched him kneel beside her wheelchair, take her hands in his, and speak words I couldn't hear. She touched his face like he was her own son, forgave him for something that maybe wasn't entirely his fault. Outside afterward, I overheard Vincent talking to another man about the arrangements. Julian had paid for everything. The funeral, the burial plot, a monthly pension for the mother for the rest of her life. He'd also set up accounts for Rico's 2 younger siblings to pay for college. He does this every time, the man said quietly. Takes care of them like family, because they are family. Vincent replied. That's what Mr. Santoro believes. You work for him, your family, and he doesn't abandon family. I left before anyone could notice me, drove back to my apartment, and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes trying to process what I'd witnessed. Crime bosses didn't attend funerals of low-level soldiers. They didn't kneel before grieving mothers. They didn't set up college funds for dead men's siblings. Unless they weren't what I'd been told they were. That night I drove past the mansion even though I had no reason to. The gates were closed, but I could see lights on in the back. The garden. I parked down the street and walked closer, staying in the shadows. Julian was there, alone, sitting on a stone bench in the rain that had started falling an hour earlier. No coat, no umbrella. Just sitting there letting the water soak through his clothes. His shoulders shook. He was crying, the kind of crying men do when they think nobody's watching. Raw and uncontrolled and desperate. I stood behind a hedge 50 feet away and felt something crack open inside my chest. This wasn't performance. This wasn't manipulation or image management. This was a man drowning in guilt and grief for a kid who died on his watch. Ryan had cried like that once. After we'd lost a case, a young mother sent back to an abusive husband because we couldn't gather enough evidence in time. He'd sat in his car in the precinct parking lot at 2 a.m. and broken down completely. I'd found him there, held him while he fell apart, and never mentioned it again, because that's what partners did. Looking at Julian now, I saw the same thing. Someone who cared too much. Someone whose conscience ate at them every time they failed to protect someone under their responsibility. I went home and didn't sleep. Just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the difference between the man in the file and the man I was actually seeing. They didn't match. Not even close. The next few days, Julian was a ghost in his own house. He worked late into the night, barely ate, spoke to people in monosyllables. Anna tried to feed him. He'd take a few bites and push the plate away. Vincent tried to discuss business. Julian would nod without really listening. On Thursday morning, I brought him coffee. Not because Anna asked me to. Because I wanted to. I found him in his office, surrounded by paperwork, looking exhausted. "Mr. Santoro?" I knocked softly on the open door. "I brought coffee." He looked up, surprised, like he'd forgotten other people existed. "You don't have to do that." "I know." I set the cup on his desk. Anna had also sent bread, still warm. I added that next to the coffee. He studied me for a moment. Really looked at me for maybe the third time since I'd started working there. "What is your name?" "Your real name. Not what the agency calls you." My pulse jumped. "Maria." "No." He said it gently, not accusatory. "Your real name. I ask everyone who works here. I like to know people, not just positions." "Maria," I repeated, keeping my voice steady even though my heart hammered. "Maria Santos." He nodded slowly, like he didn't quite believe me, but wasn't going to push. "Thank you for the coffee, Maria. And the bread. It was kind. I should have left. Should have gone back to cleaning and maintaining my cover. Instead, I heard myself ask, "Are you okay?" "No." Simple. Honest. "But I will be. Eventually. I am sorry. About Rico. You knew him? He helped me once, with cleaning supplies. He was a nice boy." I let my accent thicken. Turned nice into a word with 2 syllables. "Good person." Julian's expression crumbled slightly. "Yes, he was." He picked up the coffee, took a sip, set it down carefully. "Where are you from? In Brazil?" Here we go. The cover story I'd memorized. "São Paulo, but I leave 3 years ago." "Why did you leave?" "My husband, he was..." I looked down, playing the part. Not a good man. I needed to start new. Somewhere safe. When I looked up again, Julian's eyes were full of understanding that felt too genuine to be fake. "I'm sorry you went through that. No one should have to run from their own home." He paused. "You are safe here, Maria. While you work for me, no one will hurt you. I promise you that." The sincerity in his voice nearly broke me. This man, who I was supposed to be investigating for crimes I was increasingly certain he wasn't committing, had just promised to protect me from a danger that didn't exist. "Thank you," I whispered, and meant it for reasons I couldn't explain. After that, things changed. Julian started greeting me every morning when I arrived. Small nods, brief words in Portuguese that he clearly practiced. "Bom dia." "Como está?" "Good morning. How are you?" I'd respond in character, and he'd move on with his day. But those moments became something I looked forward to in a way that terrified me. I started noticing details I'd ignored before. How he always held doors for Anna. How he thanked Paulo every time they went somewhere. How he kept fresh flowers in every room because they made the house feel less empty. How he had photos of people scattered throughout his office. Not just Sophia. His parents. People who'd worked for him. Even a photo of himself as a child with an older man who had to be his father. He wasn't a monster. He was just a person trying to navigate an impossible situation he'd inherited through birth, rather than choice. Harris called on my second Monday. "We need results, Reed. You've been in there 3 weeks. Where's the evidence?" "I'm working on it." "Work faster. We have budget constraints. This operation is expensive. Either you find something actionable, or we pull you out." I hung up feeling sick, because the truth was, I didn't have anything. The financial records showed old activity, 3 years old, nothing current. The conversations I'd recorded were legitimate business discussions. The only illegal activity I'd witnessed was Julian trying to survive in a world that wanted to destroy him. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with all my notes spread out, trying to make them say something they didn't. Trying to turn a grieving widower who took care of his people into the criminal the department needed him to be. Ryan's photo watched me from the shelf. I imagined what he'd say about this. About manufacturing evidence to close a case. About destroying a man's life to meet quotas and look good for promotions. He'd tell me to follow the truth, wherever it led, even if it meant admitting we'd been wrong, even if it meant going against orders. I was 3 weeks into an operation that was supposed to prove Julian Santoro was a criminal. Instead, I was starting to suspect he might be the most decent person I'd met in years, and I had no idea what to do about that. The file cabinet in Julian's office had been locked for 3 weeks. On day 22, I found it open. Not wide open, just slightly ajar like someone had closed it in a hurry and the latch hadn't caught properly. I should have walked away. Should have finished vacuuming and left the room like I was supposed to, but Harris had called again that morning demanding results, threatening to pull me out if I didn't produce something concrete. So I opened the drawer. Inside were folders organized by year. I pulled the one labeled 3 years ago, flipped it open, and felt my stomach drop. Bank statements, wire transfers, shell corporation documents, money moving through accounts in amounts that didn't match any legitimate business I'd seen Julian conduct. This was it. This was what Harris needed. I pulled out my phone, photographed every page as quickly as possible. My hands shook so badly I had to retake several shots. When I finished, I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, closed the drawer, and left the office feeling like I might throw up. That evening I encrypted the files and sent them to Harris with a brief message. 3-year-old evidence. Possible money laundering. We'll investigate if current operations match pattern. His response came back in minutes. Good work. Keep digging. We move on this in 8 days. 8 days. I had 8 days before they arrested Julian based on evidence I'd provided. Evidence that was years old, from before Sophia died. From before whatever had changed in his life that made him the person I saw now. I sat in my apartment staring at my phone, wondering if I'd just destroyed a man who was trying to be better, wondering if 3-year-old sins should condemn someone who'd spent the time since then building children's shelters and funding free clinics. The call came at 11:30 that night. Not to me, but I saw it on the news at midnight when I couldn't sleep, and turned on the television. Fire at St. Anthony's Children's Home. Multiple units responding. Children reported trapped inside. St. Anthony's. The shelter Julian funded. The one with $50,000 arriving every month like clockwork. I grabbed my keys and drove there without thinking, without planning, just knowing I needed to see what was happening. The building was engulfed when I arrived, flames pouring from second-story windows. Fire trucks blocked the street. People crowded behind barriers watching the destruction. Then I saw him, Julian, pushing past firefighters who tried to stop him, running straight into the burning building through the main entrance. Vincent was right behind him, both of them ignoring the shouts from emergency personnel. My heart stopped. I watched the doorway they disappeared into, counting seconds. 30. 60. 90. The roof groaned, threatening to collapse. Black smoke poured out in thick columns. At 2 minutes, Julian emerged carrying a child. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, coughing and crying. He handed her to a paramedic and immediately turned to go back in. A firefighter grabbed his arm. Julian shook him off, said something sharp, and disappeared into the flames again. He made 4 trips. 4 times into that building while it fell apart around him. 4 children carried out to safety, while firefighters worked to contain the blaze and evacuate the rest. When he finally stayed outside, it was only because Vincent physically restrained him, and 2 firefighters confirmed all children were accounted for. I watched from behind the crowd barriers as paramedics tried to examine him. His shirt was burned, hanging in tatters. His arms were red and blistered. Soot covered his face and hair. But he pushed away medical attention, moving from child to child instead, checking on each one personally, kneeling beside them, speaking softly, making sure they knew they were safe. One little boy wouldn't let go of him, just clung to Julian's neck sobbing while Julian held him, rocking slightly, murmuring words I couldn't hear from this distance. When the boy's mother arrived, frantic and terrified, Julian stood and personally handed her son back to her. The woman grabbed Julian's face with both hands and kissed his forehead, tears streaming down her cheeks. He just nodded, said something brief, and moved to the next child. The director of St. Anthony's appeared, an older nun I recognized from my research. She approached Julian, and even from here I could see her crying. He hugged her gently, careful not to get soot on her habit. And when they separated, I heard him say clearly, "We'll rebuild. Bigger and better. I promise you, sister." I left before anyone could notice me, drove home on autopilot, parked in my lot and sat there for 20 minutes trying to process what I'd witnessed. This man, this supposed criminal I was investigating, had just run into a burning building 4 times to save children who weren't his, for a charity he funded anonymously, risking his life without hesitation because it was the right thing to do. And I'd just sent evidence to my superior that would destroy him in 8 days. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door behind me and broke down completely. Slid down to the floor with my back against the wall and cried for the first time since Ryan's funeral. Cried for the impossible situation I'd created. Cried for falling in love with someone I was supposed to destroy. Cried for not knowing what the hell to do about any of it, because that's what this was. Love. I'd fallen in love with Julian Santoro somewhere between the cemetery visits and the broken vase and the funeral for Rico and tonight's burning building. Fallen in love with a man whose past I was using to condemn his present. The next 3 days were torture. Julian came to the house with bandages on both forearms and a cough that wouldn't quit. Anna fussed over him constantly, bringing tea and forcing him to eat. He brushed off her concern, spent his time on the phone coordinating reconstruction of St. Anthony's and finding temporary housing for all 12 children. And he talked to me, started really talking in a way he hadn't before. We'd have these brief conversations when I brought him coffee or passed him in the hallway. He'd ask about Brazil, about my family, about whether I felt safe here. I'd answer in character, but the lies tasted like ash in my mouth. One afternoon he told me about Sophia, about how they'd met at a charity gala when he was 28 and she was 26. How she'd seen through the Santoro name to the person underneath, how she'd believed he could be better than his father's legacy. "She made me want to be worthy of her faith," he said quietly. We were in the library, him sitting at the desk with papers spread everywhere, me dusting shelves nearby. I was already working to change things when she died, trying to fix the mistakes my family had made. But after, it became the only thing that mattered, making sure her death meant something. "You honor her memory," I said softly, "with the shelter, with everything you do." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I forgot to maintain my accent, forgot to be Maria, just stood there as Olivia, falling deeper into something I couldn't afford to feel. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing that." On day 26, a storm rolled in that killed power to half the city. I was still at the mansion, running late because I'd been trying to plant one more listening device that kept malfunctioning. When the lights died, I was in the kitchen with the device in my hand. Julian appeared moments later with a flashlight. "Power's out across the whole neighborhood. Could be hours before it's back." Anna had left early for a doctor's appointment. Paolo was off today. Vincent was handling something at the port. It was just us. "You should probably stay until the roads are clearer," Julian said. "That storm is getting worse." We ended up sitting at the kitchen table in near darkness, just the flashlight and occasional lightning providing illumination. Started talking to pass the time. Casual at first, then deeper. He told me about growing up Santoro, about the weight of expectations he never asked for, about watching his father hurt people and knowing even as a child that it was wrong, but not knowing how to stop it. I found myself telling him truths disguised as Maria's story, about losing people I loved, about feeling trapped by circumstances beyond my control, about wondering if you could ever truly escape your past, or if it followed you forever. "I think the past shapes us," Julian said, his face half hidden in shadow, "but it doesn't have to define us. We get to choose what we do with it, whether we let it destroy us or use it to become something better." "And what did you choose?" "Better. Or at least I'm trying to be." He paused. "Some days I'm not sure if it's working." "It is," I said, and meant it completely. "You are a good person, Mr. Santoro." "Julian." He leaned forward slightly. "Please call me Julian." The space between us felt electric. charged with something dangerous and inevitable. I could see his face more clearly now, illuminated by a flash of lightning. Those dark eyes studying me like he was trying to figure out something important. "Maria," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Who are you, really?" My breath caught. "I told you—" "No." He shook his head. "I mean, who are you underneath the accent and the story about São Paulo and running from a bad husband? Because sometimes when you think I'm not looking, you forget to be her. And I see someone completely different. Someone complicated. I should have maintained the cover. Should have doubled down on Maria Santos and her fabricated life. Instead, I sat there frozen, unable to lie directly to his face in this moment of horrible, perfect honesty. "I am someone who is very confused," I finally whispered, letting my real voice through, about what is right and what is wrong, about duty and what? And feelings I should not have. The confession hung in the air between us. Julian's expression shifted, understanding dawning. He stood slowly, walked around the table until he was right in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "What feelings?" His voice was rough. I stood too, bringing us inches apart. "Julian, Thunder cracked directly overhead, so loud the windows rattled. The moment shattered. I stepped back quickly, putting distance between us, my heart racing so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "I should go," I said, switching back to Maria's accent desperately. "Storm is not so bad. I can drive home." "Maria, wait." But I was already moving, grabbing my bag from the counter, heading for the door like the hounds of hell were chasing me. Because staying meant crossing a line I couldn't uncross, meant kissing him and falling completely, and losing whatever was left of my objectivity. I drove through the storm with tears blurring my vision, windshield wipers working overtime, and arrived home soaked and shaking. Sat in my car listening to thunder and wondering how the hell I was going to survive the next 8 days before Harris moved on the arrest warrant, before I destroyed the man I loved with evidence I'd provided, before I had to choose between my duty as a cop and the truth I'd uncovered about who Julian Santoro really was. Day 27 started like any other. I arrived at 6 a.m, let myself in through the back door, started my routine, but everything felt wrong. My skin crawled with the knowledge that in 3 days Harris would move on the arrest warrant. 3 days until I destroyed Julian, based on evidence from a life he'd already left behind. Vincent was waiting in the garden when I went to empty the trash, just standing there among the roses like he'd been expecting me. My pulse spiked, but I kept walking, kept playing Maria Santos even though something in his posture told me the game was over. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "The real you and the real me. No more pretending." I stopped walking, considered running, decided against it. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do, Detective Reed." He said my real name like he'd been saving it, waiting for the right moment. "I've known since your second week here. Recognized you from case files. You were Ryan Mitchell's partner, the one who survived." The mention of Ryan's name from Vincent's mouth felt like a violation. I dropped the trash bag, turned to face him fully. "If you've known that long, why didn't you tell Julian?" "Because I wanted to see what you'd do. Whether you were here to destroy him or discover the truth." Vincent stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "And I think you've found the truth, haven't you? That the man you're investigating isn't the monster your department believes he is. What I've found is complicated. Life usually is." He glanced back at the house, making sure we were alone. "Julian has been working with the FBI for 14 months. Not your department, the FBI. They have separate jurisdiction, different objectives. He's been feeding them intelligence on the Cartel de Sinaloa in exchange for immunity and a way out of the life his father forced on him. Por se tratar de ponto de encontro com testemunha cooperadora já homologada, a presença dos agentes foi previamente autorizada pelo promotor federal, mantendo o departamento local fora do circuito operacional." My breath caught. 14 months. That's before you ever showed up. Before your department decided to investigate him for crimes he committed 3 years ago, when he was still trapped in his father's world. Vincent's voice was steady, matter of fact. "Sophia's death changed everything. The cartel killed her when they discovered Julian was negotiating with federal authorities. They sabotaged her brakes, made it look like an accident. Julian has spent the last 3 years systematically dismantling them from the inside while trying to turn his family's legitimate businesses actually legitimate. I felt the ground shift beneath me. The financial records I found, the evidence I sent to my superior. That's all from before Sophia died. Exactly. 3-year-old crimes that he's already answering for through his FBI cooperation. If your department arrests him now, it blows the entire federal operation. The cartel walks. Julian loses his immunity deal, and he probably ends up dead within a week. Why are you telling me this? Vincent studied me with those calculating eyes that missed nothing. Because I see how you look at him. And more importantly, I see how he looks at you. Like maybe he's found something worth living for again after 3 years of just existing. He paused. And because I think you're a good cop who wants justice, not just an arrest. There's a difference. My department has a tupera, I said, testing the Portuguese word for mole. Someone corrupt who wants Julian dead before he can testify. We suspected as much. The FBI has been careful not to coordinate with local police for exactly that reason. Vincent crossed his arms. But they don't know about your operation. Your department went rogue, probably at the direction of whoever's being paid by the cartel. Harris. My superior's name tasted bitter. It has to be Detective Harris. He pushed for this operation. He's been demanding results. Then you have a decision to make, Detective Reed. You can follow your orders, arrest Julian in 3 days, and watch everything collapse. Or you can tell him the truth and help us stop this before it's too late. I looked at the mansion, at the windows of Julian's office where I could see him moving around inside. The man who ran into burning buildings for children, who visited his wife's grave every week, who carried guilt for every person hurt under his watch. He doesn't know about me, I said. You haven't told him I'm a cop. I wanted to see if you'd tell him yourself, if you'd choose honesty over duty. Vincent headed toward the house, paused at the door. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I tell him everything. Better he hears it from you. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, going through motions while my mind raced. Every time Julian passed me in the hallway, every brief smile or word of greeting felt like a knife twisting. I was living a lie that was about to destroy both of us. By evening, I'd made my decision. I couldn't sleep anyway. At 2 a.m, I drove back to the mansion, parked 3 blocks away, walked to the property. Vincent was at the gate, saw me coming, and simply opened it without a word. Julian's office light was on. Of course it was. He rarely slept, haunted by ghosts and responsibilities. I let myself in through the back door, climbed the stairs, stood outside his office trying to remember how to breathe. He was at his desk surrounded by papers, reading something on his laptop. His hair was messy like he'd been running his hands through it. He'd discarded his jacket hours ago, rolled up his sleeves. He looked tired and human, and so far from the criminal mastermind my department had painted him as. I knocked softly on the door frame. He looked up, surprised, then concerned. Maria? What are you doing here at this hour? Is something wrong? Yes. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me. Everything is wrong. And I need to tell you the truth before I lose my nerve. He stood slowly, wariness creeping into his expression. What truth? My name isn't Maria Santos. I let my real voice through. No accent. Just me. It's Olivia Reed. I'm a detective with the city police department. I've been undercover in your house for 27 days, gathering evidence to arrest you for money laundering and weapons trafficking. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched emotions flicker across his face. Shock. Betrayal. Hurt. Anger. He took a step back like I'd struck him physically. You're a cop. His voice was flat, controlled in a way that scared me more than shouting would have. Yes. Everything was a lie. Maria, the story about Brazil, running from an abusive husband. All of it. Yes, I whispered. All of it was a lie except what? Now there was anger, sharp and cutting. Except the part where you planted listening devices in my home? Or the part where you photographed my private files? Or maybe the part where you pretended to care while gathering evidence to destroy me? Except the part where I fell in love with you. The confession hung between us. Julian's expression cracked, showing the pain underneath. Don't you dare use that word after everything you've done. I know I have no right. I know I betrayed your trust in the worst possible way. But you need to hear the rest because your life is in danger. I spoke quickly, desperately. I sent those financial records to my superior. He's moving on an arrest warrant in 3 days. But Vincent told me everything this morning. About the FBI, about Sophia, about the cartel. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know you were working with federal authorities. Vincent told you. His eyes narrowed. He knew what you were? Since my 2nd week here. He was protecting you by watching me. Making sure I didn't... I broke off, pressing my hands against my face. The evidence I found is 3 years old. From before Sophia died. Before you started cooperating. My department is compromised. Someone wants you dead before you can testify against the cartel. And I helped them without realizing what I was doing. Julian sat down heavily in his chair, processing. When he looked at me again, the anger had cooled into something more dangerous. Calculation. Why are you telling me this now? Because it's the right thing to do. Because you deserve to know. Because... I took a shaking breath. Because watching you risk your life for those children in that fire made me realize that everything I thought I knew about you was wrong. You're not a criminal, Julian. You're a man trying to fix the mistakes of a legacy you never asked for. I am a criminal. His voice was bitter. I've done things you couldn't begin to imagine. Hurt people. Made choices that keep me awake at night. The fact that I'm trying to be better now doesn't erase the past. No. But it should matter. Your cooperation with the FBI matters. What you've built with the shelters and clinics matters. You matter. I stepped closer to his desk. And if my department arrests you in 3 days, all of that ends. The cartel wins. You die. And everyone you're trying to help loses the protection you provide. So what do you suggest, Detective Reed? The formality of my title from his lips hurt. That we run? Disappear? Spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? I suggest we work together. Contact your FBI handler. Coordinate with them to identify the corrupt cop in my department and stop the arrest before it happens. I pulled out my phone, set it on his desk. I have recordings. Evidence of my superior's involvement. It might be enough to prove he's being paid by the cartel. Julian stared at the phone, then at me. You'd betray your own department. I'd choose justice over orders. There's a difference. I used Vincent's words because they were true. My partner Ryan died because we trusted the wrong people. I won't make that mistake again. Not when innocent lives are at stake. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was trying to see through to the truth beneath all my lies. I don't know if I can trust you. I know, and I don't blame you. But you don't have to trust me. Just trust that I want to stop the people who killed Sophia. Trust that I want the cartel destroyed as much as you do. I met his eyes directly. And trust that I meant what I said. I love you, Julian. That's the one true thing I've given you in 27 days of lies. Love isn't supposed to hurt this much. No, I agreed softly. It's not. But we don't get to choose who we fall for or when. We just get to choose what we do about it. He stood again, walked to the window overlooking the garden where I'd spoken to Vincent hours earlier. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. If we do this, if we work together, it changes everything. You become complicit in my cooperation with the FBI. Your career is over. Your life as you know it ends. My life as I knew it ended the moment I realized the man I was investigating was better than the system I worked for. Julian turned to face me fully. We have 3 days. Maybe less if your superior moves faster than expected. This is going to be dangerous, Olivia. People are going to get hurt. You could get hurt. I'm already hurt. I touched my chest where my heart felt like it was breaking. But I'd rather fight beside you than watch you destroyed by my mistakes. He nodded slowly. Then we fight. Together. And pray that it's enough to survive what's coming. By dawn, we had a plan. Julian's FBI handler was Special Agent Sarah Brooks, based out of the federal building downtown. Vincent contacted her at 5 in the morning, used code words that confirmed this was urgent. She arrived at the mansion at 6:30 with 2 other agents, all looking grim. "You're telling me there's a corrupt detective in the local PD trying to compromise our operation?" Brooks was mid-40s, sharp eyes, the kind of person who'd seen every con in the book. She looked at me with professional suspicion. "And you're that detective's undercover operative who's now switching sides?" "I'm choosing the right side," I corrected. "Detective Harris has been pushing this investigation from the beginning. He demanded results, set an arrest timeline that coincides exactly with Julian's upcoming testimony against the cartel. It's not coincidence." Brooks pulled out a tablet, started making notes. "We've suspected a leak in local law enforcement for months. That's why we've kept this operation completely compartmentalized. But if they've managed to plant someone inside your precinct specifically to target Mr. Santoro, that's bold even for the cartel." "They killed his wife," I said quietly. "Bold is their specialty." Julian stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the exchange with controlled intensity. We hadn't talked about us since my confession hours earlier, hadn't addressed the wreckage of trust between us. Right now, survival took priority over feelings. Brooks outlined the plan. Julian would continue his normal routine, pretending he had no idea about the impending arrest. I would return to the precinct, act like nothing had changed, and wait for Harris to make his move. The FBI would monitor everything, ready to intervene the moment the cartel showed their hand. "The arrest is scheduled for day 30, I explained. "That's tomorrow. Harris will probably try to kill Julian during the operation to make it look like self-defense or an unfortunate casualty. Either way, Julian dies before he can testify. Which means we need to flip this," Brooks said. "Use you as bait to draw out Harris and any cartel operatives he's working with. Catch them all in one move." Vincent stepped forward. "How do we keep Mr. Santoro safe during this? If the cartel realizes the trap, they'll send everything they have. Federal tactical teams will be positioned at strategic points. The moment Harris or anyone else makes a move, we shut it down." Brooks looked at Julian. "But you're right that this is dangerous. Mr. Santoro, you'll be exposed during the operation. There's real risk here." "I've been at risk for 3 years," Julian replied. "Ever since I decided to turn against my father's legacy. This just makes it official." I spent the rest of the morning going over every detail of my communications with Harris. Every email, every phone call, every report I'd submitted. Brooks recorded it all, building a case against him that would hold up in federal court. By noon, the plan was set. I'd go back to my apartment, respond to Harris's messages like everything was normal. Tomorrow morning I'd meet him at the precinct for final operational briefing. Then the arrest would proceed as planned, except this time the FBI would be waiting. Julian walked me to my car when it was time to leave. Vincent and Brooks gave us privacy, staying inside while we stood in the driveway under gray afternoon sky. "This is insane," I said, unable to look at him directly. "Using you as bait, risking your life because I gave Harris the evidence he needed. You didn't know, and you came back to fix it. That counts for something." His voice was softer than it had been hours ago. Some of the anger had cooled, leaving exhaustion behind. "Olivia, after tomorrow, assuming we both survive, you understand what happens next. You go into witness protection, testify against the cartel, disappear for however long it takes to ensure you're safe. 2 years minimum, probably longer. New identity, new location, no contact with anyone from this life, including you." He finally looked at me directly. "And you'll go back to being a detective. Different precinct, probably, given that half your department will be under investigation. But you'll rebuild your career. Have the life you were supposed to have." "The life I was supposed to have doesn't include falling in love with someone I can't be with." "No," he agreed quietly. "It doesn't. But we knew from the beginning this couldn't work, even before you told me the truth. A cop and a criminal, it's not exactly a foundation for forever. You're not a criminal anymore. You're someone trying to fix the damage and build something better. The law doesn't distinguish between what I was and what I'm trying to become. Neither does my past." He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried. "But for what it's worth, these last few weeks with you, even the parts that were lies, made me feel human again. made me remember what it was like to want something beyond survival and revenge. Tears burned behind my eyes. Julian, I'm sorry. For everything. For lying. For the investigation. For loving you when I have no right to. Stop apologizing for that part. You can't choose who you love any more than I could. His hand came up, cupped my face gently. Tomorrow we do what needs to be done. We stop Harris, protect the FBI operation, and make sure the cartel pays for Sophia and Rico and everyone else they've destroyed. After that, he trailed off. After that, we go our separate ways. Yes, the word sounded like it cost him. But tonight, for these few hours before everything changes, can we just be two people who found something real in the worst possible circumstances? I should have said no. Should have maintained professional distance. Should have protected what was left of my heart. Instead, I nodded. We went inside. Told Brooks and Vincent that I was staying until after dark for security reasons. Nobody questioned it. Maybe they understood better than we did that some moments only come once. The library became our sanctuary. Fire in the fireplace, even though it wasn't that cold, just for the light and warmth. We sat on the couch and talked about things that didn't matter and things that mattered too much. He told me about Sophia, about their plans for the future that never happened, about guilt and grief and learning to live with ghosts. I told him about Ryan, about the partnership we'd had, the trust that had gotten him killed, about survivor's guilt and second chances, and being terrified to care about someone again because caring meant eventual loss. Ryan would have liked you, I said at some point when the fire had burned low. He believed in redemption, in people choosing to be better even when it was hard. He sounds like he was a good man, a good partner. He was. I wish you could have met him. I pulled out my wallet, found the photo I'd carried for 2 years. Ryan in his dress uniform, smiling at something off camera. I think he'd understand what I'm doing. Why I'm choosing this instead of following orders blindly. Julian took the photo carefully, studied it. Thank you for showing me this. For trusting me with something that matters. When he tried to hand it back, I stopped him. Keep it, as a reminder that good cops exist. That not everyone wearing a badge is corrupt or blind or unwilling to see the truth. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, pulled something from his pocket in return. A rosary, old and worn, the beads smooth from years of use. This was Sophia's. Her grandmother gave it to her when she immigrated from Italy. She never went anywhere without it. I stared at the delicate silver chain. Julian, I can't take this. It's too important, which is exactly why I want you to have it. He placed it in my palm, closed my fingers around it. Sophia would have liked you, Olivia. She believed that love could exist even in dark places, that it was worth fighting for even when the odds were impossible. She'd want you to have something that meant everything to her. The tears came then, quiet and steady. He pulled me against his chest, held me while I cried for everything we were about to lose. His hands moved through my hair, his breath warm against my temple. When I finally looked up, his eyes were wet too. I love you, I whispered. I know it's complicated and impossible and completely insane, but I love you, Julian Santoro. I love you too, Olivia Reed. And if there's any justice in this world, if we survive tomorrow and the universe has any mercy left, we'll find our way back to each other, somehow. He kissed me then, gentle at first, then desperate, like we were trying to memorize each other through touch alone. We moved together naturally, inevitably, two people who'd been circling this moment since the first real conversation. It wasn't just physical. It was goodbye and hello, and everything in between. Later, in the quiet hours before dawn, we lay tangled together on the library couch, the fire reduced to embers. Julian's fingers traced absent patterns on my shoulder. Sophia's rosary was around my neck. Ryan's photo was in Julian's pocket. Promise me something, he said quietly. Tomorrow, when everything goes to hell, you run if you need to. Don't try to be a hero. Don't sacrifice yourself for me. I can't promise that. Olivia, you'd do the same for me. You ran into a burning building for children you'd never met. You think I'm going to stand by and watch someone kill you? I lifted my head to look at him. We protect each other tomorrow. Both of us survive. That's the only acceptable outcome. He smiled, sad and beautiful. You're stubborn. "You're one to talk. We're going to make it through this," he said, like saying it could make it true. "And then, when it's safe, when the cartel is destroyed, and I've paid my debt to society and you've rebuilt your career, we'll find each other again. I don't care if it takes 2 years or 10. I'll wait." "So will I." We stayed like that until the sun rose, holding on to something we both knew was already slipping away. In a few hours, I'd return to being Detective Reed, and he'd become bait in a trap designed to save his life while ending the world we'd built in 30 days. But for this moment, we were just Julian and Olivia, 2 people who'd found love in impossible circumstances and were brave enough to believe it might survive what came next. Day 30 arrived with deceptive calm. I met Harris at the precinct at 7 in the morning, wearing my detective shield and the wire the FBI had provided. He looked tired, agitated in a way that set off every alarm bell in my training. "Operations a go for 1,000 hours," he said, spreading tactical maps across the briefing room table. "We move on the Santoro residence with full force. SWAT will breach the front entrance while you and I take the back with tactical support." "Understood." I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was racing. "What about surveillance? Has he shown any indication he knows we're coming?" "None." Vincent reported normal activity this morning. Santoro's in his office conducting business like any other day. Harris pulled out his service weapon, checked the magazine. "This ends today, Reed. One way or another." The phrasing made my blood run cold. One way or another. Like he'd already decided Julian wasn't going to survive the arrest. Brooks had warned me that Harris would try something during the operation itself. Use the chaos of the breach to take Julian out and claim self-defense or crossfire. I had FBI agents positioned at strategic points around the mansion, federal tactical teams ready to intervene. But Harris was a veteran cop who'd survived 25 years on the street. He knew how to create opportunities that looked accidental. At 9:45 we rolled out. 6 patrol units, 2 SWAT vans, and unmarked vehicles carrying federal agents Harris didn't know about. I rode with Harris, my weapon holstered, but my nerves screaming that something was about to go very wrong. The convoy stopped 3 blocks from the mansion. SWAT assembled, checking gear and running final communications checks. I saw federal agents mixed among them, recognized Brooks in tactical gear coordinating with the SWAT commander. Harris stood apart, speaking quietly into his phone. His body language was wrong, tense, anticipatory. At 9:58 we moved into position. I was supposed to be with Harris at the rear entrance, but I deliberately lagged behind, watching him. He kept checking his phone, kept glancing toward the tree line on the western side of the property. That's when I saw it. A figure moving through the shadows of those trees. Someone with a rifle, positioning for a clear shot at the mansion's main windows. At Julian's office specifically. Harris wasn't going to kill Julian himself. He'd hired a sniper to do it during the confusion of the breach. Make it look like the cartel had attacked during the arrest. Eliminate Julian and destroy the FBI's case in one move. I didn't think. Just ran, pulling my weapon and screaming into the wire. "Sniper in the western tree line. Harris is compromised. Move now." Everything happened at once. The sniper turned toward me, rifle swinging around. Harris shouted something I didn't hear. The mansion's front door burst open as SWAT breached, and Julian appeared in his office window, exactly where the sniper needed him to be. I threw myself forward, putting my body between the window and the shooter. The shot cracked loud enough to make my ears ring. Something punched into my left shoulder, spinning me sideways. I hit the ground hard, weapon flying from my grip. Pain exploded through my entire upper body, but I could still move my arm. Not a fatal hit. Federal agents swarmed the tree line. I heard more gunfire, shouting, someone calling for medical. Through the chaos, I saw Vincent and Julian's men emerging from concealed positions, surrounding the property. Brooks had positioned them there as backup, ensuring Julian had protection from all angles. Harris tried to run. Made it maybe 20 feet before 2 federal agents tackled him to the ground. They had his hands zip-tied behind his back within seconds, Miranda rights being read while he struggled and cursed. I lay on the grass trying to breathe through the pain. A paramedic appeared, started cutting away my jacket to assess the wound. "Clean through and through," she said, pressing gauze hard enough to make me gasp. "You're lucky. Missed the bone and major vessels. Julian, I managed. Is he? Mr. Santoro is secure. Brooks appeared in my field of vision, kneeling beside me. Vincent got him to the panic room the moment SWAT breached. He's safe, Detective Reed. Thanks to you. They loaded me into an ambulance. As the doors closed, I caught one glimpse of Julian being led out by federal agents, Vincent at his side. Our eyes met across the distance. He looked terrified, relieved, devastated. Then the ambulance doors shut, and he was gone. I spent 4 weeks in the hospital. The bullet had done more damage than initially thought, required 2 surgeries to repair muscle and tissue. Physical therapy started in week 2, painful sessions of regaining range of motion. Brooks visited regularly, keeping me updated on the case. Harris had been working for the cartel for 18 months. They'd paid him $200,000 to eliminate Julian before his testimony. He'd compromised 3 previous FBI operations, gotten 2 other witnesses killed. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He'd spend the rest of his life in federal prison. The cartel operatives they'd captured during the operation had rolled on each other rapidly. Names, locations, supply chains. The FBI had dismantled the entire East Coast network within a month. 47 arrests total, including every member of the leadership structure. Julian was in protective custody, preparing for the federal trial. I wasn't allowed contact with him. Brooks said it was for both our safety, that any connection between us could be exploited. I understood the logic. Didn't make it hurt less. On my last day in the hospital, a nurse brought me a manila envelope. Someone left this at the front desk for you. Said it was important. Inside was a single piece of paper. Julian's handwriting. No signature. Nothing that could identify him if someone else found it. Just words that I read until I'd memorized every letter. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. Thank you for seeing who I was trying to become instead of who I'd been. Wait for me, however long it takes. I'll find you again. Tucked behind the letter was Ryan's photo, the one I'd given Julian that last night. And Sophia's rosary, the one I'd been wearing when I was shot. They'd given me back my most precious things, a promise that he'd keep his. The department gave me a commendation for bravery and exposing corruption. I accepted it in a ceremony I barely remember, still numb from everything that had happened. My captain offered me any position I wanted in the precinct. I requested a transfer instead. Couldn't stay in a place filled with memories of Ryan and Julian and all the ways my life had fallen apart and rebuilt itself. I was promoted to sergeant detective in a city 3 states away. Started over in a department that didn't know my history. Didn't know about the undercover operation or the man I'd fallen in love with while investigating him. Just knew I'd been decorated for exceptional service and had a track record of closing difficult cases. Vincent sent updates every few months through encrypted channels. Julian had testified. The trial had lasted 3 weeks. Every defendant was convicted. Julian had entered witness protection immediately after, disappeared into a new identity and life the FBI had constructed for him. Vincent didn't know where. Nobody did, except the marshals handling his case. 2 years crawled by. I threw myself into work, built a reputation in my new department, tried to convince myself that I was moving on. But I kept Sophia's rosary in my pocket every day, kept Ryan's photo in my wallet, carried pieces of 2 people who'd defined different parts of who I'd become. On a Sunday afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where Ryan was buried, sat on the grass beside his headstone and told him everything I hadn't been able to say while he was alive. About Julian. About choosing justice over orders. About loving someone I couldn't have and learning to live with that loss. You'd like him, I said to the marble. You'd understand why I did what I did. I hope wherever you are, you're proud of me. I'm trying to be the kind of cop you taught me to be. 2 years to the day after the operation, on a night when rain hammered against my apartment windows, someone knocked on my door. I almost didn't answer. It was past midnight. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my gun was in the bedroom safe out of habit, but something made me check the peephole. Julian stood in the hallway, soaked from the rain, looking older and tired and absolutely real. I opened the door with shaking hands. You're here. You're actually here. The cartel leadership was neutralized. All of them either in prison or dead from internal power struggles. The FBI cleared me to leave the program 2 months ago. He stayed in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was welcome. I got a new legal identity. Legitimate job as a security consultant. Spent 8 weeks tracking you down through every legal channel I could find. You should have called. Let me know you were coming. I was afraid you'd tell me not to. His voice was rough, uncertain in a way I'd never heard from him. That 2 years was too long, and you'd moved on and I'd waited too long to find you. I stepped forward and pulled him inside, kicked the door closed, and kissed him like the past 2 years had been minutes instead of forever. He responded immediately, hands coming up to frame my face, his body solid and warm and present against mine. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. My apartment was small and ordinary, nothing like his mansion, but standing here in my tiny living room with rain drumming overhead, it felt like the only place either of us needed to be. I didn't move on, I said quietly. I tried, but you don't move on from something that changes you fundamentally. I'm not the same person I was. He touched the rosary I'd pulled out from under my shirt, the chain still around my neck after 2 years. The program, the isolation, rebuilding myself from scratch. It was necessary, but it was hard. I'm different too. What we went through, what we survived. It changed both of us. I led him to the couch, sat down still holding his hand. I don't know what this looks like now. How we build something real when we both have so much history and damage and complicated pasts. Slowly, Julian said. Honestly. One day at a time until we figure out what works for us. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a worn photo, Ryan's picture. I kept this with me through everything. Reminder that good people exist even in dark places. I showed him my wallet, where Ryan's photo still lived next to my badge. He would have liked you, would have understood why we're worth fighting for. We talked through the night, filling in 2 years of separation. He told me about witness protection, the isolation and paranoia, slowly learning to trust that he might actually survive. About testifying in trial after trial, watching the cartel dismantled piece by piece. About the day the marshals told him the threat level had dropped enough that he could reclaim some version of a normal life. I told him about my new department, about building a career on my own merit instead of running from the past, about visiting Ryan's grave and realizing I could honor his memory while still choosing to love someone new. As dawn broke through my apartment windows, we stood together looking out at a city neither of us had lived in before. Rain had stopped, leaving everything washed clean and new. No promises about forever, Julian said quietly. Too much can still go wrong, but I want to try. Want to see if we can build something real after everything we've survived. Me too. I laced my fingers through his. One day at a time. Honest. Together. We walked out into the morning, rain-soaked streets reflecting early light. The future was uncertain, complicated, probably difficult, but we'd survived impossible odds separately. Maybe together we had a chance at something better than survival. Maybe we had a chance at actually living. Julian squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. And we kept walking. Two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and refused to let that define what we could become.